Snow fell softly like ash on Christmas Eve. The enemy laughed as they hauled her beneath the pine tree rope, biting into frozen skin. They thought she was finished, just another captive to make an example of before dawn. Somewhere in the valley below, ASCAL team whispered broken prayers over a dead radio. No one knew the woman hanging in silence had once ended wars with a single breath. As church bells echoed faintly through the storm, she opened her eyes. Christmas miracles, after all, come wrapped in vengeance. The mountains swallowed radio waves like they swallowed light. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross pressed the handset against his ear, hearing nothing but the hiss of dead air and the ragged breathing of dying men. The ambush had come too fast, a coordinated strike that spoke of intelligence leaks and careful planning. His team of 12 had been whittled to 7 in the space of 20 minutes. Viper 1 to Overwatch, we are taking heavy casualties. Repeat, heavy casualties. Request immediate air support. His voice remained steady despite the chaos. Years of training kept emotion locked away in a compartment he'd open later, if there was a later. Static answered him. Corporal James Riley hunched behind a fallen log 15 meters to Cross's left, applying pressure to Sergeant Bradley Morrison's thigh wound. The snow around them had turned pink, then red, then a deep crimson that seemed black in the fading light. Morrison's face had gone the color of old paper. "Boss, we need to move," Riley called out. Morrison's bleeding through the packing. Cross knew they couldn't move. Not yet. The insurgent force had them pinned in a kill zone, a shallow depression in the forest where pine trees offered concealment but little cover. Every time someone shifted position, automatic weapons fire raked their position with disciplined precision. These weren't the disorganized militants they'd expected. These were trained soldiers with night vision, thermal optics, and enough ammunition to wait out the storm. And the storm was getting worse. Wind howled through the valley, driving snow sideways with enough force to sting exposed skin. Visibility had dropped to maybe 30 meters. In another hour it would be full dark. Cross had lost contact with headquarters 40 minutes ago, right after the first RPG round had vaporized their communications specialist and most of their long-range equipment. They were alone. Private First Class Derek Walsh, the youngest member of the team at 22, crawled up beside Cross. Blood streaked his face from a laceration above his eyebrow. "Sir, I count at least 20 hostiles in a semicircle around our position. They're not advancing, just keeping us locked down." "They're waiting," Cross said quietly. "Waiting for dark or waiting for us to bleed out?" "Whichever comes first." "What about the caves?" Walsh asked. "The ones marked on the map 2 clicks northeast." Cross had considered it. The cave system would provide shelter and defensible positions, but getting there meant crossing open ground under fire. With 3 wounded men, they'd be cut down before they made 50 meters. "We'd never make it," he said. That's when they heard the screaming. It came from upslope in the direction of the enemy positions, high-pitched, terrified cutoff abruptly. Then laughter. Harsh voices shouting in a language Cross recognized but didn't speak fluently. More laughter. "They got someone," Riley said, his voice tight. "One of ours." Cross did a quick head count. 7 accounted for in their immediate position. He'd lost visual contact with Petty Officer Sarah Chen during the initial ambush, but had assumed she was dead. The alternative capture was worse. The voices grew louder, more celebratory. Through the driving snow, Cross saw lights moving on the ridge above them. Flashlight beams cutting through the storm. The insurgents were focused on something else, now distracted. "This might be our window," Cross whispered. Riley prepped Morrison for transport. "Walsh, get everyone ready to move on my signal." But the window closed as quickly as it had opened. The lights moved downslope toward a massive pine tree that stood alone on a small rise. Through his night vision scope, Cross watched as 6 insurgents dragged a figure through the snow. Small, limp, combat fatigues torn and bloody. Chen. They positioned her beneath the tree while others threw a rope over a thick branch. Cross felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. He wanted to open fire to empty his magazine into those laughing bastards, but tactical reality held him paralyzed. Any movement would bring the full force of the insurgent position down on his remaining men. He was a commander. He had to think of the 7, not the 1. But watching them tie that rope made him feel like something less than human. They hoisted her up slowly, methodically making a show of it. Her boots kicked weakly at first, then went still. The insurgents formed a semicircle around the tree weapons held, casually admiring their work. One of them said something that made the others laugh. A gift, Cross thought he heard. Something about a gift. Church bells rang in the distance, impossibly far away from some village in the valley, where people gathered for Christmas Eve services, unaware that men were dying in the mountains above them. The sound was faint, almost dreamlike, carried on the wind between gusts. The insurgents left 2 guards at the tree and withdrew to their positions. The celebration was over. Now they waited again, watching Cross's team with the patience of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Riley had crawled up beside Cross. He'd seen everything through his own scope. "Boss," he said quietly. "We can't." "I know," Cross interrupted. He didn't need to hear the rest. He knew exactly what they couldn't do. The snow fell harder now, beginning to coat the figure hanging from the tree. In 30 minutes, she would be white, indistinguishable from the landscape. A ghost made of winter. Cross lowered his scope and keyed his radio one more time, knowing it was useless. "Viper 1, to any station, we are surrounded and taking casualties. 1 captured and executed. If anyone can hear this, we are 4 clicks southwest of Checkpoint Delta. Send everything you have." Static. He was talking to ghosts. Morrison groaned behind him, consciousness fading. Walsh had his rifle trained on the tree, his finger too close to the trigger. Riley stared at the snow accumulating on his boots, jaw working silently. They were going to die here. All of them. On Christmas Eve, in a forest whose name Cross couldn't even pronounce, fighting for reasons that seemed increasingly abstract with each passing minute. The figure hanging from the tree didn't move. The snow kept falling. The church bells had gone silent. The rope bit deep enough to leave marks that would last forever, assuming forever lasted more than a few hours. She'd stopped fighting it after the first minute. Fighting wasted oxygen, and oxygen was the most valuable commodity in the universe when you couldn't properly draw breath. Instead, she focused on technique, the same technique that had kept her alive through situations that would have killed anyone else. Shallow breaths. Slow. Through the nose. Don't panic. Panic kills faster than bullets. Count heartbeats. Keep them under 90. The insurgents were still laughing. Their leader, a stocky man with a thick beard and eyes that held the flat affect of someone who'd seen too much death to be moved by it anymore, stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell tobacco and wood smoke on his clothes. He said something in his language, then switched to broken English. "You are Christmas present for us," he said, grinning. "American woman soldier. Very rare. Very valuable." She didn't respond. Talking wasted air, and she'd need every molecule she could get. He seemed disappointed by her silence. He'd wanted fear, probably. Begging. That's what men like him needed, the psychological confirmation that they held power over life and death. When she gave him nothing, his smile faded. "You think you are strong." He leaned closer. "You think your friends will save you? Look." He gestured toward the valley below, where the SEAL team was pinned down and slowly dying. "They cannot save themselves. No one is coming. You understand, no one." She understood perfectly. She'd been in enough combat zones to recognize the tactical reality. The SEALs were combat ineffective, low on ammunition with multiple casualties and no communications. They'd be lucky to survive until dawn. They certainly couldn't mount a rescue operation, which meant she was on her own. The leader studied her face for another moment, searching for something: fear, desperation, hope, and finding nothing. His expression hardened. "Leave her," he told his men. "Let her freeze. When sun comes, we cut her down and take pictures for internet. Show Americans what happens to their women who pretend to be soldiers." The group dispersed back to their fighting positions, leaving 2 younger men to guard the tree. They settled into a position 20 meters away, rifles across their laps, sharing a cigarette. Every few minutes, one of them would glance over at her as if checking to make sure she was still there, still dying. She was patient. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon, more valuable than accuracy or stealth. She'd once waited 11 hours, in a hide site, barely breathing, for a single shot. 11 hours without moving, without eating, without even shifting her weight, because the target was worth it, and the shot had to be perfect. This wouldn't take 11 hours. The snow helped. It coated her face and clothing, making her less distinct in the landscape. The cold helped, too, counterintuitively. It kept her alert, kept her mind sharp. She'd been through SERE, training, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, in conditions far worse than this. She knew how to manage hypothermia, how to keep her core temperature stable, even as her extremities went numb. She knew how to survive. But more importantly, she knew how to kill. The guards weren't watching her anymore. They'd relaxed into routine, convinced that the woman hanging from the tree posed no threat. Why would she? She was tied helpless, slowly suffocating. The rope was thick, military-grade cord designed to hold hundreds of pounds. The knots were professional, tied by someone who knew what they were doing. They'd made only one mistake. They'd assumed she was just another soldier. Through the falling snow, she could make out the SEAA position in the valley below. They'd gone quiet, conserving ammunition, probably treating wounded. She'd been part of that unit once in another life. Different faces, different names, but the same brotherhood. The same willingness to die for the person next to you. She'd walked away from that life 3 years ago, after the mission that broke something fundamental inside her. The mission they'd erased from every record, classified so far above top secret that even acknowledging its existence was a federal crime. She'd been the best. Everyone said so. 63 confirmed kills at ranges most snipers couldn't even conceive of attempting. Shots that seemed physically impossible, that bent the rules of physics and probability. She'd ended insurgencies, stopped terrorist operations, eliminated targets that conventional forces couldn't touch. And then they'd asked her to do something she couldn't do. So she'd disappeared, changed her name, buried her service record under layers of bureaucracy and misdirection, became a ghost. She'd been working private military contracts, small jobs that kept her skills sharp without attracting attention. This was supposed to be a simple escort mission, protect a convoy, get paid, move on. The ambush had changed everything. Now she was hanging from a tree on Christmas Eve, and the universe had presented her with a choice: die quietly like they expected, or remind the world why she'd been legendary in the first place. She opened her eyes fully for the first time since they'd strung her up. The guards were still facing away, still sharing their cigarette. The wind was picking up, masking sound. The snow was falling harder, reducing visibility. It was time. She began testing the rope with micro movements, feeling for weak points. The frozen hemp had less give than it would have at normal temperature, but that worked in her favor. Ice crystals had formed along the fibers where her body heat met the freezing air. Those crystals were sharp, abrasive. She started a rocking motion, barely perceptible, using her core muscles to create tiny oscillations. Forward and back, so small that the guards wouldn't notice even if they turned around. Each swing dragged the rope across the branch above her, microscopic friction wearing at the fibers. It would take time. She had time. The church bells started again, in the valley, calling the faithful to Christmas services. The sound was thin and distant, but it carried perfectly through the cold air. She kept swinging, forward and back, breathing shallow, heartbeat steady. The guards finished their cigarette and lit another. She kept swinging. This was going to be a very long night for someone, but not for her. Her real name was Catherine Reed. The world had known her by her call sign Cardinal. 3 years ago, she'd been the most decorated female sniper in naval special warfare history. Before she turned 30, she'd operated in 7 countries. Most Americans couldn't find on a map, had earned 3 Navy Crosses and a Silver Star, and had become a legend in the tight-knit community of special operators who lived in the shadows. They called her Cardinal because of her patience, waiting still as a bird in winter branches until the perfect moment to strike. Also because of her hair, which had been red before she dyed it dark brown and disappeared. The mission that ended her career had happened on Christmas Eve exactly 3 years ago. Different mountains, different war, same endless cycle of violence dressed up in political justifications. She'd been assigned to overwatch for a hostage rescue operation. High-value target, an American aid worker captured by insurgents and held in a compound deep in hostile territory. The SEAL team would breach at dawn. Cardinal's job was to eliminate any threats that emerged during extraction. Simple. Clean. She'd done it a dozen times before. The breach went perfectly. The team secured the aid worker and began exfiltration. Cardinal provided cover from a hide site 800 meters away, her rifle trained on the compound's exit routes. She'd already dropped 2 sentries before the main force even knew Americans were inside. Then the children came out. Not soldiers. Children, 10 of them ranging from maybe 6 to 14 years old, driven from a building adjacent to the target compound by the noise and smoke. They ran into the courtyard, panicked and screaming, and behind them, using them as cover, came 6 insurgent fighters. The tactical situation was clear. The fighters were armed with RPGs and automatic weapons. If they reached firing positions, they'd kill the entire SEAL team. The team couldn't engage without hitting the children. The fighters knew it. They were using the kids as human shields, positioning them deliberately. Cardinal had the angle. From her elevated position, she could thread shots between the children, hitting the fighters without touching the kids. 6 shots. 6 kills. Mission saved. Her spotter, a kid named Davis, 24 years old, on his first deployment, had read the tactical situation the same way. "You have clear sight lines," he'd whispered. "Recommend engagement." She'd settled her breathing, pressed her cheek against the stock, felt the familiar calm that came before every shot, the moment where the world contracted to a single point and time seemed to stop. The fighter in the lead had grabbed a girl, maybe 8 years old, and pulled her tight against his chest. Not close enough to prevent a shot. Cardinal could have put a round through his brainstem from 800 meters, even with a moving shield, but close enough to make the message clear. Shoot, and you're shooting past a child. Your crosshairs will be on her face, even if your bullet isn't. Davis had been insistent. "Cardinal, you need to take the shot. Team is at risk." She'd had 6 seconds to decide. She didn't take the shot. Instead, she'd shifted aim and put a round through the wall behind the fighters, a precise shot calculated to spook them into breaking formation. It worked. The fighters scattered, pulling away from the children. The SEAL team used the distraction to maneuver into better positions and neutralize the threats with close-range fire. Everyone lived. Mission accomplished. Except Command saw it differently. In the after-action review, the analysts ran the numbers. Her hesitation, those 6 seconds, had increased mission risk by 37%. If the fighters hadn't scattered, if they'd held formation and opened fire, the entire SEAL team could have been wiped out. The fact that her gamble paid off didn't change the statistical reality. "You're a sniper, not a tactician," the Admiral had told her in a closed-door meeting that officially never happened. "Your job is to take the shots you're given. We have entire teams of people whose job it is to worry about rules of engagement and acceptable risk. Your job is to eliminate threats. That's it." She'd requested reassignment to training duties. Request denied. They'd given her 2 choices: return to operational status or accept a medical discharge for psychological unfitness. They couldn't force her to take shots she didn't want to take, but they could make sure everyone knew she'd become unreliable. She'd chosen option 3, disappear. It took her 8 months to erase herself from military records, another 4 to build a new identity, solid enough to pass background checks. She'd worked private security contracts that kept her skills sharp: bodyguard details, convoy escorts, site security. Nothing that required her to look at children through a scope. This convoy job was supposed to be routine. Transport supplies from a forward operating base to a civilian reconstruction site. The contractors running the operation hadn't mentioned that the route passed through territory controlled by a well-organized insurgent network with a grudge against American personnel. The ambush hit at dusk, coordinated and professional. Her convoy team had fought hard, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. She'd managed to take down 6 hostiles before a concussion grenade had stunned her long enough for them to close in. Now, she was hanging from a tree, while her old teammates' people, who might have served with her once, who might remember Cardinal, died slowly in the valley below. The universe had a sick sense of irony. Her shoulders burned from supporting her weight. The rope had cut off enough circulation that her hands were numb. But the microscopic sawing motion continued steady and patient. The frozen rope fibers were beginning to fray where they scraped against the branch. Another hour, maybe less. The guards had gone quiet, huddled against the cold. One of them stamped his feet, trying to maintain circulation. Good. The more uncomfortable they were, the less attention they'd pay to her. Snow collected on her eyelashes, reducing her vision to narrow slits. Through that limited view, she tracked the insurgent positions by the glow of their cigarettes and the occasional flash of movement. 20 combatants, maybe 25, arrayed in a loose perimeter. They had the high ground's superior numbers and no reason to take risks. They'd wait for dawn, then finish off the SEALs with overwhelming force. Unless something changed the tactical equation. Unless a ghost came back from the dead. Catherine Reed Cardinal had ended her career 3 years ago, because she couldn't take a shot that put children at risk even hypothetically. But these men hanging in the darkness around her weren't children. They were professional killers who'd tortured and executed prisoners who'd strung her up like a trophy, who were preparing to slaughter a pinned-down team of Americans on Christmas morning. The math was different now. Simpler. The rope was wearing thin. She could feel the individual fibers beginning to separate under the constant friction. Not long now. Soon she'd drop, and in the confusion of that moment, guards startled reaching for weapons, she'd have maybe 3 seconds of surprise. 3 seconds to go from victim to threat. 3 seconds to remind the world that legends didn't die just because bureaucrats filed away their paperwork. The church bells had stopped ringing. Midnight services were over. Families were returning to warm homes, to Christmas trees, and wrapped presents to the comfortable fiction that their country wasn't fighting wars in mountains most of them had never heard of. Cardinal kept swinging, forward and back. Patient as winter. Deadly as ice. The rope was almost through. The rope parted at 147 hours. She'd been tracking time by counting heartbeats, a trick she'd learned during her first deployment, when precision timing could mean the difference between a successful shot and civilian casualties. 1 heartbeat per second, 60 per minute, 3,600 per hour. Her internal clock was accurate to within 30 seconds even under stress. The moment the rope gave way, she converted the fall into a controlled drop, bending her knees to absorb impact and rolling immediately to her right. The guards were 20 meters away, but they'd been facing the valley, watching for movement from the SEAL position. By the time they turned at the sound, she'd rolled into a shallow depression and lay absolutely still, covered in snow, indistinguishable from the landscape. She heard them shouting, boots crunching through snow. More voices joining from other positions. Panic in their tone. A prisoner had escaped. Alert. Search. Find her. She didn't move. One of the guards approached the tree, inspecting the rope end. He called out something, probably asking how it was possible for the rope to break. Another guard answered defensive, insisting he'd tied it properly. They were 10 meters from her position. She could hear their breathing. One of them played a flashlight beam across the snow, searching for tracks. The beam passed over her twice, pausing on the second pass, and she prepared herself for violence. But the guard's attention was drawn away by more shouting from the ridge. The insurgent leader had arrived, furious. She recognized his voice, even though she couldn't understand the words. He was berating the guards, probably threatening punishment. Standard command dysfunction in a force that relied more on fear than training. Their mistake. The best special operations units worked on trust and competence. Fear made people stupid. The leader organized a search pattern, teams of 3, spreading out in concentric circles from the tree. Professional enough, but they were searching for someone in panic, someone running blindly through the forest. They weren't searching for someone who'd gone to ground and embraced the winter. She'd buried herself in a snowbank using combat debris as camouflage. Thermal imaging would have spotted her, but these insurgents were working with flashlights and night vision, both useless against a target that knew how to use negative space and had been trained in Arctic survival techniques. The search parties moved past her position 3 times in the first 15 minutes. She waited. Patience. A sniper could wait forever. At 220, the insurgent leader called off the active search. She heard the frustration in his voice. He issued new orders: double the perimeter guards, maintain watch through the night, resume search at dawn when they could use daylight, and properly organize search teams. The guards dispersed. She waited another 30 minutes, counting heartbeats, making absolutely certain they'd settled into their new positions before she moved. Her hands were still numb from the rope, but circulation was returning in painful stages. She flexed her fingers, slowly working, feeling back into them. A sniper needed hands. Without dexterity, she was just another refugee hiding in the snow. The insurgent positions had shifted. The leader had correctly assessed that his primary mission, eliminating the SEAL team, took priority over chasing an escaped prisoner. Most of his force remained focused on the valley, but he'd posted additional guards around the tree where she'd been hanged and had stationed a quick reaction force near his command post. Smart, professionally trained, which meant he was also predictable. She began moving at 252 using a technique called tactical glacial advance. Inches per minute. Any movement faster than the wind-driven snow would register to alert eyes. She'd once crossed 200 meters of open ground using this technique without being spotted, and she'd done it in broad daylight. Her first objective was weapons. The dead didn't need their rifles. During the initial ambush on her convoy, she'd seen at least 4 insurgent fighters go down. In the chaos and celebration afterward, the bodies would have been collected, but their equipment might still be scattered across the battlefield. She found the first body at 318. Young man, maybe 25, with a neat hole in his chest where one of her convoy guards had placed a round before dying. The insurgents had stripped him of his weapon and ammunition, but they'd missed the combat knife strapped to his ankle and the signal mirror in his breast pocket. She took both. The knife was cheap, Chinese-manufactured steel, but it had an edge, and that made it valuable. The signal mirror was better military-grade NATO standard. In daylight, she could use it to communicate, or to blind, or to start fires. At night, it was just weight, but she kept it anyway. The second body yielded better results. This fighter had been carrying a basic medical kit when he died: bandages, gauze, pressure dressings, and 3 morphine syrettes. She took everything. The kit also contained water purification tablets and a foil emergency blanket. No weapons yet, but her situation had improved. The third body was the jackpot. Older fighter, experienced, probably a squad leader based on the radio equipment he'd been carrying. The insurgents had taken his rifle and radio, but they'd missed the backup weapon, a Makarov pistol, in a concealment holster against his lower back. 4 magazines total. 32 rounds of 9mm ammunition. Not much, but enough. She field-stripped the Makarov in darkness, checking the action, testing the trigger pull. Solid weapon. Soviet-era reliability. The magazines were full and the ammunition looked relatively fresh. 32 rounds against 25 insurgents. She'd worked with worse odds. At 401, she reached the edge of the insurgent perimeter. They'd established fighting positions in a semicircle overlooking the SAAL team's location, properly spaced with overlapping fields of fire supplied with ammunition and water. These weren't amateurs. They'd fought Americans before. She counted positions, memorizing locations. The leader's command post was at the high point, protected by the quick reaction force. Radio equipment there, probably. Maps. Intelligence. Priority target. But not yet. First, she needed better weapons. And she needed to shift the tactical balance. The SEALs were still alive down in the valley. She could see their position, could make out the shape of men holding defensive posture. They'd gone quiet, probably conserving ammunition, treating casualties. They thought they were alone. They needed to know they weren't. But approaching the SAAL position meant crossing the kill zone, and she couldn't do that while the insurgent force remained at full strength. She needed to thin the numbers first. Cardinal settled into a hide site 40 meters from the nearest insurgent position and began the calculations. Wind speed, temperature, trajectory. The Makarov wasn't a precision weapon, but at close range it didn't need to be. She selected her first target, a two-man observation post on the eastern edge of the perimeter, isolated enough that their deaths wouldn't immediately alert the main force. She started moving at 437 inches per minute. Absolutely silent. Invisible. The guards were focused outward, watching for the SAAL team to attempt a breakout. They never thought to check behind them. At 512, she was 3 meters from their position. Close enough to hear one of them yawn. Close enough to smell cigarette smoke on their clothes. Close enough to kill. The knife went into the first guard's kidney, a silent kill, dropping him without a sound. She caught his body before it could hit the ground and eased him down. The second guard turned at the movement, but she was already inside his reaction curve, driving the knife up under his ribs and into his heart. 2 down. She took their weapons, 2 AK-47 rifles, 6 magazines, 2 grenades, and a radio handset. Now, she had options. The radio crackled with periodic check-ins, guards reporting all clear, commanders coordinating watch rotations. She listened carefully, beginning to map the insurgent forces' communication patterns. At 534, she was ready. She keyed the radio and spoke in clear English, her voice calm and professional. "This is Cardinal. Unknown force, you should have killed me when you had the chance." Then she turned off the radio and began moving to her next position. Behind her, the insurgent communication network erupted into chaos. The insurgent leader's voice cut through the radio traffic, harsh and commanding, trying to impose order on the panic. Cardinal understood enough of the language to know he was demanding radio discipline and forbidding responses to provocations. Good commander, but his troops were rattled. They'd hanged a prisoner, and now that prisoner was out there in the darkness, armed and using a call sign none of them recognized. She gave them 20 minutes to settle down. 20 minutes was long enough for the disciplined ones to convince themselves she was bluffing, that her radio call was psychological warfare from the SAAL team. 20 minutes was long enough for the nervous ones to start imagining threats in every shadow. 20 minutes was exactly the right amount of time to create maximum uncertainty. At 554, she hit them again. Third target, a 3-man position on the western perimeter, responsible for blocking the SAAL team's most likely exfiltration route. She approached from upslope, moving through a dense stand of pine trees that provided concealment and muffled sound. The guards were good alert, scanning their sectors, maintaining proper intervals. Under normal circumstances, they would have spotted her. But Cardinal didn't move in normal circumstances. She used a technique learned from a Finnish sniper who'd fought in the Winter War, become part of the landscape. Every movement matched the rhythm of wind-driven snow. Every pause synchronized with the natural sounds of the forest. She wasn't a person moving through terrain. She was terrain that happened to be moving. At 15 meters, one of the guards tensed. He'd sensed something wrong but couldn't identify the threat. He raised his rifle, scanning the tree line, while his partner shifted position to cover blind spots. Professional response. They'd been trained well. She let them settle. Let them convince themselves it was nothing. At 6 meters, she threw a pine cone into the brush 20 meters to their left. All 3 guards turned toward the sound rifles raised. She shot the first guard twice, in the back center mass professional placement, then transitioned to the second before he could turn. The third guard managed to bring his weapon around, but she'd already closed the distance, driving her knife into his throat to avoid gunfire that would alert the main force. 3 more down. She collected their equipment, ammunition, grenades, and another radio handset. One of them had been carrying a sniper rifle, a Dragunov SVD Soviet era, but well maintained. She recognized the modifications, upgraded scope, custom trigger work, match-grade ammunition. Someone in this insurgent force was a professional marksman. Was. Past tense. She performed a functions check on the Dragunov. Solid weapon. The scope was zeroed for 600 meters. She'd need to compensate for her own shooting preferences, but that was manageable. Now she had reach. The radio traffic had changed tone. The insurgent leader knew he was losing people. Either his position reports were going unanswered, or he'd found the bodies. His voice on the radio was controlled, but Cardinal could hear the undercurrent of concern. He issued new orders: pull back to consolidated positions, establish visual contact between all units, prepare for counter-sniper operations. Smart, but it meant he was now defensive, reactive. She'd seized tactical initiative. At 623, false dawn began painting the eastern sky. Visibility improved from maybe 50 meters to almost 200. The insurgent force had contracted into tighter positions, better for mutual support, worse for covering the kill zone. They'd essentially conceded the perimeter to protect their core, which meant Cardinal could move more freely, but also meant the SAAL team remained pinned down by concentrated fire. Time to change the equation again. She found a hide site on a ridge, 400 meters from the insurgent command post, good elevation, clear sight lines, concealment from multiple angles. She settled in with the Dragunov and began mapping targets through the scope. The insurgent leader was visible in brief intervals, moving between positions, coordinating his troops. She could take the shot now, decapitate their command structure. But that would give away her position, and she'd only get 1, maybe 2 kills before they located her. She needed to be smarter. Through the scope, she identified the quick reaction force, 5 fighters positioned to respond to threats against the command post. They were bunched, too closely concerned with protecting their commander rather than maintaining proper tactical spacing. Tactical error. Fear makes people stupid. She counted heartbeats, waited for the right moment. The quick reaction force shifted position, 4 of them clustering near a large boulder, while the 5th moved to check their flank. She took him first, a single shot to the chest that dropped him silently. The others didn't notice, immediately focused on their primary threat axis. She worked the bolt, acquired the second target, fired. Now they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know where the shots were coming from. They went to ground, shouting for support. 3rd shot, 4th shot, 5th shot. The quick reaction force was gone in under 30 seconds. The entire insurgent perimeter erupted into chaos. Fighters were firing at shadows, burning ammunition at targets they couldn't see. The commander was screaming into his radio, trying to locate the sniper, trying to organize a response. Cardinal displaced 40 meters to a secondary position and waited. At 638, they made their mistake. A squad of 6 fighters moved upslope toward her previous position, weapons ready, moving with purpose. They were the counter-sniper team trained to locate and eliminate enemy marksmen. She let them reach her first hide site, let them cluster around it, checking for brass casings, trying to determine her direction of movement. Then she dropped a fragmentation grenade downslope from her new position. The grenade bounced twice before detonating in the middle of their formation. 4 of them went down immediately. The remaining 2 were wounded, crawling, screaming. She didn't take follow-up shots. Wounded fighters consumed resources, medics, security, morale. Dead fighters were just bodies. The insurgent communication net had devolved into chaos. The commander had lost control, unable to maintain discipline against an enemy that struck from nowhere and vanished like smoke. At 647, Cardinal's radio, the one she'd taken from the first guards, crackled with English. Unknown shooter, this is Viper 1. Identify yourself. The SAAL team. They'd been monitoring insurgent frequencies, had heard the chaos, were trying to determine if they had an asset in play. She almost answered. Almost, but not yet. First, she needed to finish what she'd started. The insurgent force had lost maybe half its strength, killed or wounded or too terrified to maintain their positions. But they still had numbers, and they still held the high ground. If the SEALs tried to break out now, they'd still take casualties. She needed to break the insurgents completely. At 701, full dawn arrived. The sun rose over mountains still shrouded in storm clouds, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful morning. The kind of Christmas morning where families were waking up to presents, under trees, to coffee and laughter and the comfortable warmth of home. Cardinal chambered another round in the Dragunov and sighted on the insurgent command post. The leader was visible now, organizing a retreat. Smart move. He'd recognized that staying meant being picked apart by a sniper he couldn't locate. But it was too late for smart moves. She centered the crosshairs on him and began her breathing rhythm. In, out, in, half out, hold, heartbeat, heartbeat, between heartbeats, squeeze. The Dragunov bucked against her shoulder, and 800 meters away the insurgent leader folded like paper. His second-in-command stared at the body for 3 seconds before breaking and running. The insurgent force collapsed. Some fled into the forest. Some tried to surrender. A few held their positions and died there, either too brave or too stupid to recognize when a battle was lost. At 718, the valley went quiet. Cardinal keyed her radio. Viper 1, this is Cardinal. You have fire support. Acknowledge. Silence. Then, Cardinal as in, the Cardinal. Affirmative. I thought you were dead. I got better. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross stared at his radio handset like it had started speaking in tongues. Cardinal was dead. Everyone knew that. She disappeared 3 years ago, medical discharge or psychological breakdown or voluntary retirement, depending on which rumor you believed. The official line was that Cardinal was a classified designation, no longer in active service. And now that designation was talking to him from somewhere in the mountains. Cardinal, he said carefully, need confirmation. What's your actual name? Need to know, came the reply. And you don't need to know. What you need to know is that the hostile force has been reduced to maybe 8 effectives, they've lost command structure, and they're in full retreat. You have a window for exfiltration. Riley had crawled up beside Cross, listening. His face showed the same confusion Cross felt. Is this real? Riley whispered. Cross didn't answer. He was running through possibilities. Could be enemy deception, capture a radio, fake an American accent, lure them into a trap. But the chaos they'd witnessed over the past hour had been real. The insurgent communication network had disintegrated. The fire discipline that had kept them pinned down had evaporated. Someone had torn through the insurgent position like a chainsaw through tissue paper. Cardinal Cross said, "Give me something. Prove you're who you say you are." Brief pause. Then 3 years ago, Christmas Eve hostage rescue mission in Sector 7 Niner. You were team leader for the breach. Aid worker named Peterson. Your spotter was a kid named Davis. When you got back to base, Davis was shaking so bad he couldn't debrief. You sat with him for 2 hours until he stopped crying. Cross felt something cold settle in his chest. That mission was classified. The official report had been sanitized, no mention of the sniper, who'd hesitated, no mention of the children in the courtyard, no mention of the 6 seconds that could have cost American lives. Only 3 people knew the full story: Cross, Davis, and Cardinal. Davis had been killed in action 18 months ago, which meant, holy shit, Riley breathed. She's real. Cross keyed his radio. Cardinal, this is Viper 1. We have 3 casualties requiring immediate evac. Can you provide covering fire for extraction? Affirmative. Start moving northeast toward the cave system marked on your map. I'll suppress any resistance. Copy that. Moving in 2 minutes. Cross turned to his team. Riley, prep Morrison for transport. Walsh, take point. Everyone else ready to move on my signal. We're getting out of here. Walsh looked skeptical. Sir, how do we know this isn't a trap? We don't, Cross admitted. But staying here means dying. Moving means maybe dying. I'll take maybe. They prepared in silence, working with the efficiency of men who'd trained together long enough that words were unnecessary. Morrison was barely conscious, but stable enough for transport if they moved carefully. The other wounded could move on their own. At 732, Cross gave the signal. They moved in staggered formation, weapons ready, expecting fire from a dozen directions. Nothing. They covered 50 meters. 100. 200. The forest was eerily quiet. Snow had stopped falling, and the morning sun illuminated a battlefield littered with bodies and abandoned equipment. The insurgent positions were empty, abandoned in panic. Cross's radio crackled. Viper 1, you have hostile movement at your 2 o'clock 300 meters. 4 combatants. They're running, not fighting. Let them go. He spotted the fighters through the trees, insurgents fleeing upslope, abandoning their weapons and equipment. Professional soldiers didn't just abandon a battlefield unless something had broken them psychologically. Cardinal had done that. One person. Contact, front wall, shouted. An insurgent fighter had emerged from a hidden position, rifle raised. Cross was bringing his own weapon up when a single shot echoed across the valley, and the fighter dropped. Threat neutralized, Cardinal's voice said calmly. Keep moving. They reached the caves at 754. The cave system provided everything they needed: shelter, concealment, defensible positions, and clear sight lines back toward the insurgent position. Cross established a perimeter and set his medic to work on Morrison while he tried to raise headquarters on his backup radio. Still nothing but static. Viper 1, this is Cardinal. You have approximately 90 minutes before the insurgent force reorganizes and returns with reinforcements. Recommend you prepare defensive positions. Cross scanned the ridge above them but couldn't spot her position. Wherever she was, she had perfect overwatch and complete concealment. Cardinal, what's your status? Mobile. Supplied. Uninjured. Can you reach our position? Negative. I'm more effective at range. Understood. Cross hesitated. Cardinal, about that mission 3 years ago. Not relevant. Focus on your team. It's relevant to me. Davis talked about it before he died. Said he wished he could thank you. Thank me for what? For being right. He spent 2 years in therapy after that mission, working through what it means to follow orders versus what it means to be human. Said your choice saved him, even though it ended your career. Silence on the radio. Then Davis was a good kid. He was. And he'd be glad to know you're still out there. More silence. When Cardinal spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more present. Viper 1, I'm showing movement on the access road. Multiple vehicles. Could be reinforcements for either side. Cross felt his stomach tighten. Rules of engagement. Hold fire until identification. Could be extraction assets. They waited. At 821, a convoy of 3 vehicles emerged from the tree line, American military, flying proper identification. Cross felt tension drain from his shoulders like water. Cavalry's here, he said into his radio. Cardinal, that's extraction. Can you make it to the LZ? Negative. I've got my own exfil planned. Cardinal Cross started, but she cut him off. Viper 1, your team performed well under impossible circumstances. Make sure Morrison gets proper medical treatment. Tell command that the insurgent force in this sector has been neutralized. And tell them. She paused. Tell them Cardinal sends her regards. Wait. But the radio had gone silent. Cross stood on the ridge, scanning the mountains with his scope, trying to spot any sign of movement. Nothing. She was gone. Like a ghost that had never been there at all. The extraction convoy had been a gift from the universe, arriving exactly when Cross's team needed it most. But Cardinal watched from her hide site as the vehicles loaded the wounded SEALs and prepared to depart. She had no intention of joining them. Going back meant questions. Questions meant revealing who she really was, which meant committees and investigations and people trying to force her back into a system she'd walked away from. She'd help because it was the right thing to do, not because she wanted recognition. Besides, she had unfinished business. 8 insurgents had escaped the initial assault. She'd tracked them as they fled northeast, moving with the disorganized panic of broken soldiers. But 2 hours later, she'd observed them beginning to regroup at a staging area, 4 kilometers from the battle site. They weren't running anymore. They were reorganizing, which meant someone was providing leadership, pulling them back together. Someone who hadn't been at the Christmas Eve battle. Cardinal displaced from her observation post at 843, moving through the forest with purpose now. The snow had stopped and the sun had broken through the clouds, making concealment harder, but also making tracking easier. She found the staging area at 911. Old logging camp, abandoned for years. The insurgents had established it as a fallback position, weatherproof buildings, cleared fields of fire, a defensive perimeter. Smart planning. They'd anticipated potential defeat and prepared accordingly. She counted 12 fighters, not 8. Reinforcements had arrived while she was tracking. Through her scope, she identified the new leader, older man, maybe 50, with the bearing of someone who'd seen extensive combat. He was organizing the fighters with calm efficiency, establishing watches, treating wounded, redistributing ammunition. Professional soldier, possibly former military from a national army before the regional collapse. He was also looking at a map and marking positions, conducting what looked like tactical planning. They weren't finished fighting. Cardinal settled into a new hide site and considered her options. She could report the position to the extraction team, let them call in air support or a follow-up ground force. Safe, smart professional. Or she could finish what she'd started. They'd hanged her from a tree. They'd laughed while doing it. They'd planned to execute American soldiers on Christmas morning. She was not inclined toward mercy. But tactical reality required careful thinking. 12 fighters in a defended position was different from picking off isolated guards. A frontal assault, even by someone with her skills, would be suicide. She needed to be smarter. Through her scope, she watched their routine. Guard rotation every 2 hours. Command post in the main building. Ammunition stored in a separate structure. 3 vehicles parked in an open courtyard. The vehicles were the weak point. At 1147, she displaced to a position 300 meters from the logging camp, behind a fallen log that provided excellent concealment and a stable shooting platform. She chambered a round in the Dragunov and sighted on the first vehicle's fuel tank. 3 shots. 3 fuel tanks. The vehicles erupted in flames. The insurgents poured out of the buildings, grabbing weapons, searching for threats. The new leader was shouting orders, trying to organize a response. Cardinal shot him first. Center mass clean kill. He dropped without a sound. The insurgents went to ground firing, at shadows burning ammunition, at targets that didn't exist. She displaced 50 meters and found a new position. 2 more shots. 2 more kills. They were breaking again, the fragile discipline evaporating. Some were running for the forest. Others were holding positions, firing blindly at anything that moved. Cardinal worked through them methodically, professionally. No anger, no satisfaction. Just the calm focus of someone doing a necessary job. At 1203, the logging camp was silent. She performed a tactical sweep, checking for survivors, collecting intelligence. The map the dead leader had been studying showed multiple insurgent positions throughout the region, safe houses, weapons caches, communication nodes. She photographed it with a camera from one of the dead insurgents and uploaded the images to a secure server she maintained for this purpose. Eventually, someone in intelligence would find it and put it to use. Her work here was done, but as she prepared to leave, her radio, still monitoring military frequencies, crackled with traffic. Multiple casualties at civilian hospital. Insurgent attack in progress. Requesting immediate support. She checked her map. The hospital was 8 kilometers south in a valley town that had been relatively peaceful throughout the conflict. Not anymore. Cardinal looked at her ammunition count. 37 rounds for the Dragunov. 2 magazines for the AK-47. 3 grenades. Enough. She started moving south. The hospital was burning. Not the whole structure, just the eastern wing where smoke poured from shattered windows and flames licked at wooden window frames. Cardinal observed from a ridge 500 meters away, her scope sweeping the compound systematically. The insurgent attack had been coordinated. 6 fighters had breached the main entrance, while 4 more covered the exits. They'd gone in fast and hard, likely targeting specific people, maybe local officials receiving treatment, maybe collaborators, maybe just soft targets to make a political statement. Through her scope, she counted 4 hostiles visible on the perimeter. The rest were inside. But something felt wrong about the tactical picture. The fighters on the perimeter weren't watching outward. They were watching the main road like they expected someone specific. And they were too calm. Professional soldiers taking fire from defending security forces would show more stress. These men looked like they were waiting for something. Cardinal shifted her scope to the main road and understood. A convoy was approaching. 3 vehicles, civilian pattern, moving fast. Through the shimmering heat distortion, she could make out the Markings Aid Organization International Relief Committee, exactly the kind of soft target insurgents loved for propaganda purposes. This wasn't an attack on the hospital. It was bait. The convoy would arrive, see the crisis, and stop to help. Because that's what aid workers did, they helped. And when they stopped, they'd be ambushed, captured, and likely executed on camera for maximum political impact. Cardinal keyed her captured radio to the insurgent frequency and listened. The fighters inside the hospital were coordinating timing. Hold positions. Wait for the convoy. Take them alive if possible. She checked her ammunition again. Not enough to neutralize 10 fighters at range before they could execute hostages or detonate explosives. Which meant she needed a different approach. At 1,241, she began moving downslope. The terrain favored her dense forest cover, rocky outcroppings, multiple concealment positions. She reached the hospital perimeter at 1,249, settling into a position behind a concrete barrier 25 meters from the main entrance. The convoy was 2 minutes out. Cardinal took 3 deep breaths and keyed her radio to the insurgent frequency. Then she spoke in the language they'd understand, not their native tongue, but the universal language of fear. She started singing, "Silent Night, Holy Night." Her voice echoed across the compound, eerily calm, impossibly clear. The insurgents on the perimeter froze, trying to locate the source. All is calm. All is bright. Inside the hospital, she heard shouting. The fighters were confused, unnerved. Someone was out there, someone who wasn't afraid, someone who was hunting them. Someone they'd hanged from a tree and thought was dead. Round yon virgin, mother and child. One of the perimeter guards broke cover, moving toward her position. Mistake. She shot him twice. Center mass. Professional placement. Holy infant, so tender and mild. The other perimeter guards opened fire, but they were shooting at echoes, at nothing. She'd moved again, displaced to a new position before they could acquire her. Sleep in heavenly peace. 2 more shots. 2 more kills. The insurgent commander inside the hospital was screaming into his radio, now demanding status reports, trying to organize a response. But his fighters were panicking, firing at shadows, wasting ammunition. Sleep in heavenly peace. The convoy screeched to a halt 50 meters from the hospital entrance. The aid workers had seen the chaos and were reversing, trying to escape. Smart. Cardinal shot out their rear tires. Not to trap them, to force them to take cover. They abandoned the vehicles and dove into a drainage ditch, safe from the crossfire. The insurgents tried to pursue, but Cardinal dropped 2 more fighters before they'd covered 10 meters. 6 down. 4 to go. But those last 4 were inside the hospital with patients and medical staff, and Cardinal couldn't shoot what she couldn't see. She needed them to come out. At 1,253, she stood up and walked directly toward the main entrance rifle, held casually, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The insurgent commander appeared in a shattered window, weapon raised. He recognized her. She could see it in the moment. His eyes went wide. "You," he said in accented English, "you're dead. We killed you." "You tried," Cardinal said. "Didn't take." He swung his rifle toward her, but she was already moving, diving behind a concrete pillar, as automatic fire stitched the ground where she'd been standing. Return fire came from an unexpected angle. The aid workers in the drainage ditch had grabbed weapons from the dead insurgents and were providing covering fire. Untrained, wild shots, but enough to force the commander back from the window. Cardinal used the distraction to advance. She cleared the entrance in textbook fashion, sliced the pie check corners, move with purpose. The hospital interior was chaos, overturned beds, scattered medical equipment, smoke that stung her eyes. She found the first insurgent in a hallway, trying to use a nurse as a human shield. "Let her go," Cardinal said quietly. The fighter snarled something defiant and pressed his gun against the nurse's head. Cardinal shot him through his right eye. The nurse dropped unharmed and Cardinal was already moving past, clearing the next room. 2 insurgents in the ward executing patients in their beds. She dropped both before they could turn around. The commander was making his escape through a back exit, dragging a wounded doctor with him. Cardinal pursued, but carefully. She'd seen this tactic before, the desperate commander using a hostage to buy time. She caught up to them in the parking lot behind the hospital. The commander had his rifle pressed against the doctor's temple, backing toward a motorcycle parked at the lot's edge. "Stay back," he shouted. "Stay back, or I kill him." Cardinal stopped 20 meters away, rifle raised, but not aimed. "You know who I am?" she asked calmly. Yes. Cardinal. The legend. The ghost. Then you know I don't miss. I have a hostage. You have a shield. For now." The commander's face twisted with fear and rage. He'd thought he was fighting scattered soldiers and soft aid workers. He hadn't expected a legend to come out of retirement just to hunt him specifically. "Your mistake," Cardinal continued, her voice, absolutely calm, "was hanging me from that tree. You had a chance to kill me quick. You got greedy. Wanted to make an example. That hesitation cost you your entire force." She shifted her aim, fractionally calculating angles, wind speed, the small movements of both men. "You should have taken the shot when you had it," she said. "Now it's too late." The commander yanked his rifle away from the doctor's head, trying to swing it toward Cardinal. She shot him once, through the throat. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The doctor stared at her, shaking. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you." "Get inside," Cardinal said. "Help the wounded." She didn't wait to see if he obeyed. She was already moving. The sun was high and bright when Cardinal reached the extraction point. Not the official military LZ where Cross's team had been picked up hours ago. Her own extraction, a private helicopter chartered through the network of contacts she'd maintained from her contracting days. No questions asked. Cash payment. Pilot who understood that some passengers needed discretion. The helicopter was waiting in a clearing 6 kilometers from the hospital. She climbed aboard without speaking, and the pilot lifted off immediately, banking west toward the border and neutral territory beyond. Through the window, Cardinal watched the mountains recede. Snow-covered peaks painted gold by late afternoon sun. Beautiful country. Shame about the wars. Her satellite phone buzzed. Private number. Encrypted line. She answered. "This is Cardinal. This is Nathan Cross." The SEAL commander's voice was carefully neutral. "I know you said no follow-up, but I figured you'd want to know Morrison's going to make it. So are the others." "Good. Command is asking questions. About what happened on that mountain. About who helped us. Tell them it was tactical air support. Hellfire missile from a drone. That's what the official report should say." "Already done. But they're going to keep asking." "Let them ask." Silence on the line. Then there was an incident at a hospital. 10 insurgents dead. Civilian casualties prevented. Local authorities are calling it a miracle. Sounds like they had a good day. One witness, an aid worker, described the shooter as a woman matching your general description. Said she was humming Christmas carols while she worked. Witness was probably in shock. Unreliable testimony. Cross laughed quietly. "Right. Unreliable. Cross, why are you calling?" "Because Davis would have wanted me to. Because 3 years ago, you made a choice that cost you your career, and you did it because it was right. And because yesterday you saved 12 American lives without asking for anything in return. I did what needed doing. Nothing more." "Yeah, that's what legends say." Pause. "Will we see you again?" Cardinal looked out at the mountains. "Probably not. If you change your mind, if you ever need extraction support, anything, you have friends. Remember that." "Copy that." She ended the call. The helicopter crossed into neutral airspace at 1,534 hours. The pilot handed her a new passport, a new identity, and coordinates for a safe house where she could lie low until things settled down. She'd done this enough times to know the routine. In a few weeks, Catherine Reed would cease to exist. Again. A new name, a new background, a new life built from careful fabrication and meticulous planning. The legend of Cardinal would fade back into classified reports and whispered stories told by operators who'd heard it from someone who'd heard it from someone else. Just another ghost story from the mountains. But as the helicopter carved through winter sky, Cardinal allowed herself a small smile. Some ghosts, she thought, had more substance than people expected. Some legends didn't need statues or monuments or recognition. Some legends just needed to know they'd made a difference when it mattered. And yesterday, Christmas Eve in mountains where men were dying, she'd made a difference. That was enough. 6 months later, a package arrived at Naval Special Warfare Command. No return address. Postmarked from a country that didn't ask questions. Inside, a sniper's logbook, leather-bound, filled with handwritten notes. Target ranges. Wind calculations. Mission parameters. Every shot carefully documented with the precision of someone who understood that accuracy was sacred. The last entry was dated December 24, 3 years ago. After that, blank pages. Until the final page where someone had written in neat script. To those who served with Cardinal, the legend is retired. The mission continues. Stay safe. Hunt well. K.R. The logbook was filed in a classified archive where only a handful of people had clearance to access it. One of those people was Nathan Cross, who read it twice before locking it away. The second person who read it was a young sniper named Michael Davis, nephew of the spotter who died 18 months ago. He'd joined the team specifically because of stories his uncle had told him about a sniper who'd valued humanity over orders. He read the logbook in silence, then returned it to the archive. But he made a personal note in his own logbook, something he'd carry with him through every deployment. Take the shot that needs taking, but never forget why you're taking it. Somewhere in a quiet town where winter came gentle and snow fell soft, a woman sat by a window overlooking pine trees. She dyed her hair again, blonde this time. Different name, different background. Same person underneath. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner of her living room, decorated simply. No visitors. No family gatherings. Just quiet reflection and the satisfaction of knowing she'd made a choice 3 years ago that saved a man's soul, and another choice 6 months ago that saved 12 lives. She'd been a legend once. Now she was just Catherine, living quietly, working as a range instructor at a private security firm where nobody asked about her past. But on her mantle, barely visible, unless you knew what to look for, sat a small brass shell casing. Match-grade ammunition, the kind used for precision shooting at impossible distances, the kind that had ended wars with single breaths. Some legends don't